Every generation complains about how they were raised, but there's one group of kids nobody talks about. They weren't neglected. They weren't smothered. They were something stranger. They were trusted. If your parents were Gen X, born between the mid-60s and early 80s, you were raised by people who had almost no supervision as children, and then chose, deliberately, to do it differently with you. Not the opposite, differently. And that specific choice built a specific kind of adult. That's you. Let's talk about it. Start with the thing everyone gets wrong. Gen X parents are not helicopter parents. They're not free-range either. They're the in-between, and it's on purpose. They grew up walking home to empty houses at 8 years old, making their own food, solving their own problems, waiting hours for an adult to appear. That childhood taught them competence. It also taught them something lonelier. Nobody is coming. So when they had you, they made a quiet decision. You would get the attention they never had. But you would also get the independence they knew was worth something. So they showed up to the school events. And then they let you walk to the shop alone. That contradiction is the whole story of your upbringing. Let's break down what it actually did to you. First, you were expected to figure it out. Not cruelly. Practically. Your parents' default answer to most problems was some version of, "You'll work it out." Not because they didn't care, because they genuinely believed you could, and because that's how they learned. Psychologists talk about an internal locus of control, the deep assumption that outcomes depend on your own actions. It's built through thousands of small, unsupervised decisions. Most Gen X parents handed you those decisions early. So today, when something breaks in your life, notice what happens in your head. You don't look around for who will fix it. You start calculating. That reflex was installed. Second, your parent did not perform parenting. There was no announcement, no narration. Gen X parents grew up in a world where mistakes faded instead of going viral, and they carried that privacy into raising you. They didn't post your milestones for an audience. They didn't turn your childhood into content. So you got something rare for your generation, a childhood that mostly belongs to you and the people who were actually there. And here's the part you might not have noticed until now. That's also why your parent is not impressed by performance. They can smell it. They respect the person who quietly does the work and stays skeptical of the one who talks about it. You probably do too. Third, the sarcasm. Gen X humor is dry, ironic, self-deprecating, and it raised you inside it. It's not coldness. It's armor built during Cold War drills and adults who said don't worry while clearly worrying. So affection in your house might have looked like teasing. Love might have sounded like a joke. And if you've ever struggled to say something sincere without immediately undercutting it with a joke, that's not a flaw in you. That's an inherited dialect. Some of you are still translating it. Fourth, and this one matters, you were raised by people who watched loyalty fail. Your parents saw companies discard workers who gave decades. They saw institutions promise stability and deliver layoffs. So they did not teach you to trust systems. They taught you to trust skills. Be useful. Be capable. Have a backup. That's why so many Gen X parents quietly ran side work, kept savings you never knew about, could fix things instead of replacing them. And it's why you grew up with a low background hum that says, have a plan B. Not fear exactly, preparedness. But here's the cost, and I want to be honest about it because it's the part these videos usually skip. Being raised by someone hyper-competent and emotionally private has a price. A lot of you learned that needing help is embarrassing. You watched a parent handle everything alone and concluded that's what an adult is. So now you struggle to ask. You apologize for taking up space. You solve things quietly at 3 in the morning, instead of saying, "I'm overwhelmed," to someone who loves you. And there's another version of this. Some Gen X parents were so committed to not smothering you that the independence tipped into distance, and you got space you didn't ask for. If your childhood felt more like being trusted than being held, both of those can be true at once. You can be grateful for what they built in you and still wish someone had asked how you were doing. That's not disloyalty. That's accuracy. And there's one more thing. Your parent is not going to talk about any of this. Gen X doesn't process out loud. If you bring up your childhood, you'll probably get a shrug, a joke, or, We did the best we could. That's not dismissal. That's a generation raised to keep emotional distance just in case, and it never got the vocabulary for anything else. A lot of you are the first people in your family line who can say the sentence out loud. That's not a small thing. But here's what I keep landing on about kids of Gen X, and it's the reframe worth taking with you. You were raised by the bridge generation, the people who stood between the old world and the new one, and held both up while nobody thanked them. And they passed you something specific. Not wealth necessarily, not certainty. Competence. You know how to do things. You know how to sit with a problem. You don't panic when the plan collapses, because you were raised by someone who assumed plans collapse and taught you to be the kind of person who's still standing after. In a generation that's often told it was coddled, you were quietly handed the opposite. And the proof is that you rarely notice it, because to you, it just feels like being normal. So the next time your parent shrugs instead of saying, "I love you," or answers your problem with, "Figure it out," hear the translation. They're saying, "I believe you can." They learned that in an empty house, and it's the most valuable thing they had to give. What year were you born, and what's the most Gen X thing your parent ever says? Put it in the comments. I read every single one, and on this topic they get very good. If you want the full story of the generation that raised you, the video on your screen right now goes deeper. And subscribe if you're new here, because this channel is for the people who were trusted early and had to figure out the rest themselves. See you in the next one.